Kailash, what about you? You grew up in a small town in Calicut, right?
Yeah.
And what was teenage years like for you, especially the 10th, 11th, 12th? And I know that you started coding much earlier in life.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about those days there.
I think very different experience from what Nithin had. I was always a tinkerer, and what he just said about finding that one thing in life that you really enjoy unconditionally, that's finding purpose. So I'm extremely lucky that from my earliest memory, I remember having a liking for tinkering.
Okay.
And in the early 90s, as a child, as a young kid, I always liked tinkering. Be tinkering with little gadgets, science experiments. And I was constantly building and tweaking things at home. Little
Remember
machines.
one thing that you did, something bizarre, like?
I can remember many. One would be a mechanical vacuum cleaner with a tiny little DC motor salvaged out of some. It wasn't. There was no vacuum. It had a paper fan that swept dust in. It was a little prototype, but I enjoyed it unconditionally. Then I'd get bored with that. Then I'd move on to something else. So I think by the time I was in my, I think 6th standard or 5th standard, I was an active participant in all electronics competitions, science fairs, which continued until my teenage years. So I enjoyed it unconditionally. Every day I'd wake up with that urge to, tinker with something. And there was no computers back then. And by this sheer mad coincidence, we got a personal computer when I was in the 7th standard. I think it was the year 2000. And getting a personal computer in a borderline middle class or lower middle class family is one of those black swan events. And I don't want to delve deep into how, etc., that happened, but that happened. And that was a turning point. So tinkering with little mechanical things, it was very natural for me to transpose that into the virtual realm. Whatever you felt like you could do. And I didn't know the concept of coding or programs or software because there was no background. Just happened to have access to a personal computer. But eventually,
not internet?
No internet yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Then, and we had no concept. I'd never used a graphical, pointing device, which is a mouse up until that point. So there's no background or context. And in the year 2000, in a small town like Calicut, there's no ecosystem. There's nothing. Very few people even had personal computers back then, right? So then after a few months, I stumbled upon the idea that you could tweak things and achieve different outcomes, which was really coding. You have a computer and you can control it. You can tweak a little thing. It makes a difference. And I didn't even really understand it, but I was already doing it. And then things just progressed. I weaned off my tinkering with physical gadgets and hardware devices, and software just made absolute sense. I could wake up, envision whatever, I could try it out right there. There's zero barrier, right? Hardware, there's always barrier. There's a physical barrier. And that's what happened. By the time I was in 8th standard, I was writing software, and we had dial-up internet by 8th standard. 8 kbps, terrible internet, but it was absolutely magical. And perhaps the early years of internet, the 90s were the absolute early years of the internet, but the 2000s were the next era. And things were just warming up. So I got to be a part of that. And I look at it extremely nostalgically. That really made me as a person. So I started writing software. I started copying code from the internet and tweaking it and building it and pushing it back. And when others used little things that I built, that was immensely satisfying. A few years later, I realized that this whole thing was called the open source movement. But I was doing it before I even understood its philosophies, etc. It just made sense. How else do you learn, right? You have to copy stuff that others have built. So as a teenager, I was writing software. I think by the time I was 16 or 17, in 2002, I'd built this blogging platform, open source, and it was one of the earliest blogging platforms on the World Wide Web. Mm-hmm. And it had grown quite massive. And I was building
What is it called?
It was called B Machine.
Okay.
And it had grown big, perhaps the second biggest platform. I think it came before WordPress. WordPress is a globally renowned, massive blogging platform. And this was used by hundreds of thousands of people and institutions globally. And I was building it sitting out of my little bedroom in Calicut. But I didn't really understand things that happen in the periphery. How to become an entrepreneur, how to take it to the next level. I just enjoyed building it and putting it out there. So that's what I did throughout my teenage and even in my early 20s. I'd get excited, I'd build something, I'd publish it there, lots of people would use it, and I'd derive immense satisfaction. And by the time I had 17, I was also making a living doing freelance software consulting online. So I had an income, small, modest income. And that also had just naturally happened. So my entire teenage years and my early 20s, even when I was in the university, it was all spent on tinkering and writing software and pushing it out there. And I was absolutely addicted. 16 hours a day, 18 hours a day, would never feel tired. So extremely productive.
What were dreams about for you growing up in a small place? And locus of inspiration, was that internal to you, or were you able to sort of find inspiration outside in the world?
I think it was very internal. So I had no goals. I still have no goals. This is something we keep talking about. No grand goals in life, just going with the flow and doing something that I enjoy doing. I guess earlier I had this abstract goal of wanting to make a difference in the world. But then I think over the last decade, I've realized that even that as a goal that you want to check off is problematic.
Okay.
So I have that innate drive to perhaps make a difference, but it's not really a goal that I'm looking up to. So I just focus on what I can do right now or tomorrow and hope that that makes a small difference. So apart from that abstract goal, I never really had any goals. I never had any material goals or even like a career goal. I just wanted to tinker. And that's what I'm still doing.
For stories like this, keep following us. From Code to Culture, our podcast. Subscribe to our channel, follow us on social media.